Although I'd put Nintendo's Game Boy on the throne as king of my childhood handhelds, I also had a Sega Game Gear as a kid and absolutely loved it. Yeah, so the battery life was poor and the game library was tiny in comparison, but it was Sega and it was colour. Despite being known for Master System ports, the Game Gear actually had a lot of exclusives, some of which seem to rarely get mentioned. So here are 13 Game Gear exclusives that I think are worth your time. Arena, known as Arena Maze of Death in North America, was released in North America and Europe very late on in the Game Gear's life in 1996, and so passed many people by. The developers had a version working on the Master System as well, but it didn't see release and so became a Game Gear exclusive. The plot, which actually reminds me of the Firefly film Serenity, is set in 2026 and revolves around your character navigating several maze-like areas in an attempt to prevent a television broadcaster from controlling the population by means of brainwashing. You must broadcast evidence of their plans over the TV channels in the hope that it will instigate an uprising. Arena is an isometric action game and has pretty impressive graphics for the Game Gear. There's a melee attack on one button and the other fires whichever weapon you have equipped. Don't expect to be wowed by Arena, but its mix of action and exploration is good fun, and it's definitely one for Game Gear enthusiasts to check out. Axe Battler: A Legend of Golden Axe was released in all regions in 1991 and is an action RPG spin-off of the Golden Axe series. You play as the titular Axe Battler, the male warrior from the main series, and he's once again setting off on a quest to prevent Death Adder from using the legendary Golden Axe to destroy the world. Axe Battler has frequently been compared to Zelda 2 on the NES, and its gameplay combines top-down exploration with side-scrolling action platformer segments, the latter of which trigger when enemies are encountered. Not the best RPG on the system by any means, but one definitely worth grabbing for Game Gear owning RPG fans, or those with an interest in Golden Axe lore. Coca Cola Kid is a Japanese exclusive side-scrolling adventure game released in 1994. Starring Japan's 90s Coca-Cola mascot, the titular Coca Cola Kid, the game was also released as a pack-in title with a limited edition Coca-Cola Game Gear console. The Kid runs through the levels on the time limit, attacking enemies and destroying obstacles with kicks. He can also hang on to walls, allowing him to jump from wall to wall to gain access to higher spaces. Pretty standard platform type gameplay, but it's fun and with some well presented bosses and has nice graphics too. A shame it never saw a Western release. Factory Panic was released in 1991 in Japan and Europe, and it didn't come to North America, although Tectoy did bring it to Brazil. Apparently the original Japanese release starred Mikhail Gorbachev, the Soviet Union's president at the time, for those not old enough to remember, but in the European version it's just a generic boy. He's working in a factory and must deliver certain items to their respective people who are waiting at the end of a series of conveyor belts. Gameplay is, in theory, simple puzzle fare, with the boy manipulating switches and links, with the aim being to ensure that the correct item goes to the relevant person. In practice, it can be quite challenging, with quick thinking often being required. As a player progresses to harder levels, security guards must also be avoided, and hazardous items must be diverted away from the item recipients, making the game even more of a challenge. This is a real gem on the system in my opinion, and it's very suited to a handheld, which is perhaps why it was exclusive to the Game Gear. It's also pretty inexpensive, so grab yourself a cart on eBay. The GG Shinobi 2: The Silent Fury was released in all regions in 1992. The player controls Ninja Joe Musashi on a mission to find 5 crystals. The first 4 levels can be played in any order, and defeating the boss will grant you access to one of Joe's ninja pals, who have special abilities. The player can then access the other ninjas during the levels, and their abilities like double jump and grapple allow the player to access previously out of reach areas in which a crystal can be found. Once the 4 crystals have been found, the castle becomes accessible, in which the player can fight the Black Ninja to gain the 5th and final crystal. Gameplay is the kind of quality action platforming that you'd expect from a Shinobi game, but the added element of being able to switch to characters with special abilities adds a little something extra. And the music's awesome. This really is one of the must-haves for the Game Gear. Mega Man was released in 1995, so quite late in the system's life, but solely in North America. As you've probably guessed as it's on this list, Mega Man on the Game Gear isn't a port, but its own game, although it does borrow elements from Mega Man 4 and 5 on the NES, and Dr. Wily's Fortress is lifted from Quickman's stage in Mega Man 2. Die-hard Mega Man fans will probably find this game a bit slower than the NES's Mega Man games, but it's a decent entry in the series nonetheless. Definitely worth a look. Ninja Gaiden was released in all regions in 1991 and is an action platformer in the popular Ninja Gaiden series. This game is great fun and actually looks more like a Strider game than a game in the Ninja Gaiden series. The buttons are jump and attack, but pressing down an attack will use items collected like throwing shuriken. It's much easier than you'd usually expect from a Ninja Gaiden game, but that suits me just fine, although more accomplished players may be left hungry for more of a challenge. Popils, known in Europe as Popils the Blockbusting Challenge, and in Japan as Magical Puzzle Popils, is a platform puzzle game released in 1991 in Japan and 1992 in Europe and North America. Each level contains a short puzzle in which the player character, a boy, must reach the princess through the manipulation of blocks and ladders. A simple premise indeed, but some of the puzzles can be really tricky. Popils contains 100 levels in total, but also has a level editor in which the player can create their own puzzles, so the game has even more replay value. Much like Factory Panic, this sort of game is really suited to a handheld system and it's really addictive, so Popils comes highly recommended. Sonic the Hedgehog Triple Trouble, released in Japan as Sonic and Tails 2, is the sequel to Sonic Chaos and was released in all regions in 1994. The player can play as either Sonic or Tails, with each having a unique ability. Sonic can perform his strike dash from Sonic CD by holding up and jump, allowing him to gain speed from a standing start, much like the spin dash, and Tails has the ability to fly. Most of the Game Gear's Sonic games were Master System ports, so Triple Trouble is bigger than the system's previous Sonic games and is more similar to those on the Mega Drive, but as a result it can suffer from slowdown in places. I really like this game despite some complaints that it's too easy, although I do find the movement to be a bit floaty and I'd recommend it to any Game Gear owning Sonic fans. Defenders of Oasis is one of the best RPGs to come to the Game Gear in the West and was released in all regions in 1992. The story is an Alibaba Sinbad type Arabian affair whose plot I won't go into as it's bloody confusing, but blah blah blah, good versus evil, yada yada. The main player character is the prince of the game world, and along the journey more characters can be enlisted: the genie of the lamp, a boy called Salim, and a thief called Agmar. Gameplay follows the usual JRPG format, with the player traversing a 2.5D world and switching to turn-based combat when enemies are encountered. I was never the biggest fan of turn-based RPGs like this, but if you are, then I'd thoroughly recommend grabbing this, and back in 1992 you were getting a lot of bang for your buck with Defenders of Oasis. Crystal Warriors came to the Game Gear in 1991 in Japan and 1992 in Europe and North America. It's a turn-based strategy game which has similar gameplay elements to games like Shining Force and Fire Emblem. There are 16 levels in which the player commands a party of up to 9 who must battle their way across a map to defeat an enemy party protecting a castle. Battles are turn-based and attacks consist of melee attacks, spells and monsters, and defeated monsters can be tamed and then used strategically in future battles. Units belong to one of 4 elemental groups, earth, wind, fire and water, with each having advantages over enemies of a particular elemental type. The plot is pretty thin. Evil Jin has stolen 3 of the 4 elemental crystals used to keep peace in the realm, and the sorceress princess Iris must battle to retrieve them. The only plot points occur at the start and end of the game, so it's largely irrelevant anyway. Another game that offered a lot for the price of entry, Crystal Warriors offers a good challenge and some replay value as you can play through the game again with different party members or using a different strategy. I'd recommend this to anyone wanting a Game Gear game with a good strategy element, as there aren't many, or to any fans of games like Fire Emblem or even Pokemon. Another genre that's poorly represented on the Game Gear is shooters. GG Aleste was released only in Japan in 1991, and as with many shooters on Sega systems, it's a crying shame that it never made it to Western shores. It's a vertical shooter that scrolls diagonally, although I do find the scrolling to be a bit jerky, although this really isn't an issue when it's all kicking off on screen, as you don't really have time to pay attention to it. The fire button fires both your normal shot and one of several special shots that can be collected in the form of power-ups, and the fire button can be held down for rapid fire. The special weapons look great as they fill up the screen, my favourite being blue rings that act as homing missiles, as they make the game, especially the bosses, so much easier. GG Aleste has a great pace and some awesome music, and the visuals are pretty decent for a Game Gear title too. I'd recommend this to anyone wanting a game that's good for a quick blast, but it's really a no-brainer for any fans of vertical shooters. Last but not least is Ronald McDonald in Magical World, which was released only in Japan in 1994. Interestingly though, it will translate into English if played on a European or American Game Gear, perhaps hinting at a planned Western release. Although an entirely different game, it does have many similarities to 1993's platformer McDonald's Treasureland Adventure on the Mega Drive, and did use some of Treasure's assets despite being developed by Sims. There are 4 themed areas, each containing 4 levels, with a boss at the end of each area. Ronald is equipped with an umbrella, which both acts as a weapon and allows him to glide. There are also 2 mini-games, one a picture matching puzzle and one where Ronald collects items on a plate in a way reminiscent of Burger Time. Gameplay is fun and can be quite a challenge too, but offers a password save system to help you along. It really is a crime that this game never left Japan, as it's arguably the best platformer on the Game Gear. Everything is spot on, the graphics are top notch considering the hardware, and the soundtrack, which is partly borrowed from Treasure's Mega Drive game, is excellent. Definitely worth importing. So those are my 13 most recommended Game Gear exclusives. Let me know in the comments if there are any other exclusives on the system that you think should have made the list. I've left a link to a site where you can play some of these games in your browser, so check that out if buying an actual cart copy of any of the games is beyond your means, or if you simply want to try before you buy. Thanks for watching.